Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Women's Equality Day 2021. I'm so glad you're all here, and sorry for the heat, but thank goodness for the shade. And you will find bug spray and sunscreen on your tables, and plenty of cold water over there. So first up, we would like to have our Vice President of Academic Affairs say a few words first before we get started. Woo!
Good warm afternoon, everyone. As Jennifer said, my name is Jerry Pope, and I'm Vice President of Academic Affairs here at Kansas City, Kansas Community College. And I'm proud to welcome everyone to our celebration of Women's Equality Day, where we commemorate the granting of women the right to vote in the United States on August 26, 1920, with the passage of the 19th Amendment. Today we'll also learn about the Equal Rights Amendment drafted in 1923, yet still unratified. Thank you to Erica Benson for her presentation. Finally, we're recognizing and thanking all the administrative assistants here at Kansas City, Kansas Community College, and for the wonderful, amazing work that they do. We all know that many times the administrative assistants are the glue that holds us together. So thanks very much for the work that you do here at the college. Yeah. On behalf of Dr. Greg Mosier, President of KCKCC, the board, I welcome everyone to this exciting presentation and celebration. In closing, let us remember a quote from Margaret Thatcher, and for those of you who know me, I hope you appreciate this quote, and it's my attempt at sense of humor. If you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Those were perfect words. I couldn't have said it better. In fact, all I was going to tell you was that Women's Equality Day is a celebration of women getting the vote, and they worked hard for 72 years to do that without any wars, and no blood was shed. So it's definitely a thing to celebrate. And last year was the 100th anniversary of Women's Equality Day. And so many colleges and universities around the country were planning big celebrations, as were we. But we are very fortunate and very proud to say that we did actually do our celebration, albeit in a very creative way. We filmed our speaker over there in the heirloom garden, and she spoke about how Kansas suffragettes helped the national movement of women trying to gain the right to vote so much that they changed the colors from their purple and green were the colors. They wore their white dresses, and they wore purple and green sashes, the suffragettes did. But Kansas was so helpful and so important in helping women get the vote that they changed the color for the Women's Equality flag, which is blown up there. It's now purple and yellow instead of purple and green, and it's yellow for the sunflowers of Kansas. So you will see sunflowers in a lot of what we are doing today. The other thing about that celebration that we were going to have last year, we did do it. We live streamed our speaker. We live streamed it to students. We had a lot of students participate, so it was good. We also wanted last year to honor everyone. Normally we honor one woman for her achievements, but keeping equality in mind, we wanted to honor many. So that's what we're going to be doing today, is honoring many. So this year, since we did get to do our celebration last year, we wanted to move forward and talk about the ERA, which Alice Paul did write in 1923. So, and Erica Benson is a wonderful speaker, so we'll hear her in just a minute. I do want to thank our co-hosts, SEAM, the Center for Equity, Inclusion, and Multicultural Engagement. I like SEAM, it's a wonderful acronym, kind of holds things together. AAUW, the American Association of University Women. Is Polly Hawk here? Women's Studies? She is. Polly! Yay! Women's Studies. And I also want to say, is Andrika here too? No? You were representing. Okay. Andrika was a wonderful help last year in suggesting the heirloom garden, which was so appropriate because there's a 1920 section to it. And she was very helpful this year in saying, hey, there's shade over here. You don't want to sit in the hot sun over there. And she was absolutely right. And she's also so good at helping get students involved. So thank you to Andrika. And to Chris Ball for helping get the administrative assistants here so that we can honor them and thank them for their hard work. We will do that after the presentation. And we also have Pam Walden here representing the garden. And Pam will be telling us afterwards. She's got some fun stuff. If you guys want to, if you haven't seen the garden, some fun ways to quickly see the garden that involves a little bit of a scavenger hunt and prizes. So if you can do it, that would be great. And she's got things at the other end. So if you walk through the garden, she's got stuff at the other end. And I'm going to let her tell you about that afterwards, okay? Because I see you're eating, or do you want to say something quickly now?
What I'll say very quickly so you don't take off when it's not anything to mess with. There's two $50 prizes for first day.
I hope everyone heard that. There's two $50 prizes. Yes. So, yes, we'd love for more people to know about the garden. A lot of you use it for stress reduction. Some of you didn't even know about it and were very curious. So it was donated from the Wyandotte County Historical Museum, correct? Yeah. So moved from there. Okay. Yes. And there are many volunteers that work with Pam to keep the garden, including Rosie. I don't know if Roosevelt Hammond, if he's still around, he helps a lot with the garden too. Okay, so now I want to introduce our speaker, Erica Benson. She is with Project 28 Missouri. She is a U.S. history educator. She teaches at Blue Valley North High School and Baker University, and she is a wonderful speaker. So please welcome Erica Benson.
Thank you so much for having me, this great opportunity and this beautiful event, so I really appreciate your time. I know that some of you have more prior knowledge about the Equal Rights Amendment than others, and many of you have lived through the moments, and some of, at least for me growing up when I was in high school, we never talked about women's liberation. We never got past World War II, so it wasn't until I was in college that I was really introduced to the feminist movement of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so I'm going to try to give a little bit of background information for those of you who once knew and lived through it, and then others for that's just maybe new information to you. But as mentioned previously, Alice Paul, following the addition of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, some women were like, we did it, victory, time, let's go work on educating women voters. And other women, like Alice Paul and the National Women's Party, thought this is just the beginning. There's so much more we need to do, and we need a stronger amendment to protect women from sex-based discrimination. And so the language has changed over the years, but essentially the language we're working with today is equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And that is the language that was ratified in the 1970s by the House of Representatives and the Senate, or passed, and then sent to the states. So I'll give you a brief update on where everything is now, but essentially it was a very bipartisan effort. It's been on the platform of both the Democratic and Republican parties for a really long time, and it was first supported by, the first president that vocally supported it was President Truman, that said that women did need and deserve an Equal Rights Amendment. But it didn't get out of committee oftentimes. It would get stuck in committee, as those of you who follow politics can know, one person can dismantle the movement of an amendment. So for a long time it was stuck in House committee, and there were just a few obstructionists. And for a time there was a division within the women's movement about what the ERA would do, because there had been some, within the labor movement, some victories and protections for women to work fewer hours, or for pregnant women to have different, accommodations. And they were worried that those would go away if there was an Equal Rights Amendment. But what women convinced them was that no, everyone would be lifted to that status, that men should be only, men should work only 8 hours a day, and that these other accommodations should be made for all people. So it would be the reverse, that things would get better for all people. And so the movement united more as they went on. And so initially the amendment was ratified, that was passed in the 1970s, 70% of the House voted yes. On that bill. Can you imagine, or not 70, 90%, I'm sorry, 90% of the House voted yes for that. Can you imagine 90% of the House voting for anything today? It was a big deal, and finally when the Senate ratified, it went to the states for ratification. And almost immediately, there were states, in Hawaii, I think the same day, ratified. And it was moving really well, but there were some states where, again, with the politics of how amendment is presented and gets a full vote, there was obstructionists again, and House committees and different committees within state legislatures. It didn't progress, and so they got to 35 states, and they said, "Ooh, there was an 8-year deadline put in the preamble language of the amendment that said that basically the amendment needed to be ratified within 8 years." It's very generalized language in comparison to other amendments that have a deadline. For example, the 18th Amendment for Prohibition, the amendment has an 8-year deadline to ratify, but it's actually in the text of the amendment that was ratified, and every state voted on that text that said this will basically be null and void after 8 years if it's not ratified. In the Equal Rights Amendment, states didn't ratify that language. It's this resolution preamble language, and it's not as binding. So it's left a lot of questions that have not been answered yet by any court in the past on what does that mean? Is the preamble language actually binding or not? So the Congress in 1979 passed again with bipartisan support an extension, a 3-year extension, to try to allow more states to ratify. They went short of not doing 4 because they knew that some states would be able to flip their legislatures and get new people in there, and then they might actually ratify. So they're like, oh no, if we just keep it to 3 years, nothing much will change and there will be no movement in some of these states where it was in a battleground situation. So the deadline expired in 1982 and nothing happened. And I know it was very disappointing and disheartening for a lot of women who'd fought so hard for this. And so they just kind of moved on. But there had been a bit of a dual strategy for many women activists like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Polly Murray, who would use the 14th Amendment to try to expand rights for women using the Equal Protection Clause. So they were pretending as if the 14th Amendment was an ERA when arguing for in cases about sex discrimination, even though it wasn't actually there, and actually had some victories and gained headway. So in some sense, the 14th Amendment is our de facto ERA, but as Antonin Scalia said before he passed away, there's no guarantee that the Constitution does not discriminate, that Congress and the government does not not discriminate against women. And so his interpretation of the 14th Amendment basically says that no, the government still can discriminate against women. And so it's not as thorough as we would need, and you can see how much progress we've made from the 60s, 70s, since we've had the work of attorneys like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but we still have major flaws in our legal system that allow for sex discrimination to continue. So in 2017, Nevada, led by an African-American woman named Pat Spearman, senator. She is a lesbian, an ordained minister, and a veteran and a mother who fought against Don't Ask, Don't Tell when she was in the military. She is I recommend everybody look her up online, Senator Pat Spearman. She's amazing. But she brought the ERA back to the state of Nevada and said, this still matters in 2017, and we should ratify this. And so despite the deadline, in 2017, Nevada ratified. And so that gave a lot of energy to other states that were like, can we do this? Should we do this? Let's do this. So Illinois then ratified as well, and then it took a few years. Virginia had been trying since 2011. And finally, in 2019, again, there was one obstructionist, and then the following year, 2020, they were able to pass it. And they were the 38th state. Now, some of the challenge has been, some states have tried to rescind their ratification to the ERA and say, never mind. We ratified this, but after the backlash with the Stop ERA movement, led by Phyllis Schlafly, some of you have heard of her, recently seen the show Miss America, potentially, where they try to go through and talk about her life. But there was a conservative movement that used some of the fear-mongering tactics that conservatives that have blocked the ERA in the Senate to share with the world that basically the ERA was going to take away privileges of women, and that it would draft your daughters, and it would allow for a legalized gay marriage and all these other things to scare people into not ratifying the ERA. And there were many other actors, including her, but she was just a powerful voice in that movement. So when I'm trying to think back to where it was going to, but essentially those voices inspired some states that had already ratified to say, well, we want to unratify. But a court has never said whether or not you can unratify an amendment. There's nothing in Article 5 of the Constitution, too. It's just, this is the process for amendments. But Congress has answered that question when it comes to the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment. Some southern states tried to rescind their ratification to the 14th and 15th Amendment, and Congress said, no, you can't do that. And so there is a precedent that you can't unratify. And if you think about the 18th Amendment with Prohibition, it wasn't like everybody just unratified the 18th Amendment. They had to create a new amendment and then ratify that amendment that undid the 18th Amendment. So the constitutional legalities of all this can get a little complicated because some of them have never been heard before. So right now, we've reached 38 if you don't count the states that have rescinded their ratification. And so there's an argument that it should already be in the Constitution. And so the attorney generals of those final three states that ratified have challenged the National Archivist who was instructed by the Department of Justice under the Trump administration to go ahead and add it to the Constitution. This has already been ratified. The qualifications under the Article 5 have been met, so it should be in the Constitution. But the Department of Justice under President Trump's administration told the archivist not to ratify it. So there's a memo out there that is preventing the National Archivist from adding it. So there's a couple different lawsuits in progress. In addition to that, there's pressure on Attorney General Merrick Garland right now to remove the old memo and instruct the archivist to go ahead and add it to the Constitution. If that were to happen, of course, there are going to be some legal challenges, especially brought by states like Alabama, who never ratified and are challenging the legitimacy of it. But there's another pathway as well. The Congress can eliminate the deadline. They were able to extend the deadline in the past, so now they could potentially just eliminate the deadline altogether. That too will probably be challenged, but there's a precedent for that. So, because it was done previously. So right in March, the House of Representatives passed H.J. Res. 17, which eliminated the deadline for the ERA. And so that passed, and right now it is in the Senate Judiciary Committee. We're most likely going to have a hearing within the next couple months. And the challenge is if it comes out of committee, we have to, those who support the ERA, we have the filibuster to contend with. So we have enough votes right now to eliminate the deadline for the ERA, but not with the filibuster. So we're about 5, on a good day, senators away from having an ERA in the Constitution, because there are some Republican senators that support it. So that it's as close as it's ever been, and to start over again would be such a challenge. We would have to go back to Congress to even pass the language, and then back to the states for ratification. And so if it's been 98 years, and the work of all of those women and the tireless efforts of their campaigning, and from, women in the 1970s went on hunger strikes and marches and everything to try to put this in the Constitution. It just totally dishonors that. There's nothing in the Constitution that was written by women, ratified by women, and voted for in state legislatures. Nothing. And to deny that just by a few votes is a really hard pill to swallow. So why is the ERA even needed today when we do have the 14th Amendment and some Supreme Court precedents that do give more rights and try to prevent discrimination against women? I boil it down to litigation, legislation, and American values. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. I'm just going to watch my time. So it would make sex-based discrimination explicitly unallowable in the Constitution, just not open for interpretation. So any kind of decision that or case that we're to come across, any court in America would know this is the standard. There is no sex-based discrimination allowed in the United States, and that would be very clear. And we know when it comes to courts and legislatures, laws can change. Supreme Court cases and other cases can be repealed, or there could be a new precedent. And with a constitutional amendment, it's much harder to change. So it would be binding and lasting, and would help support so many more cases where women are bringing their case in a federal court, in particular, and state courts. In particular, thinking about gender discrimination in the workplace and gender-based violence. The Violence Against Women Act, parts of it were thrown out by the Supreme Court because it was determined that the Congress does not have the authority within its constitutional powers under the 14th Amendment or the Commerce Clause to legislate on behalf of gender-based violence, and it would give women an opportunity to sue their attacker in a federal court if the state courts and the previous courts failed to do a good job in their case. And the Violence Against Women Act and the Supreme Court said that no, that is not something that you have the power to do. So by putting that in place, Congress would have the power to write better, stronger legislation on behalf of violence against women, femicide, and all these things that are a major problem in our society. When you think about too, like Title IX, and the back and forth with Title IX, how strong is it depends on the administration. This would give a lot of strength to Title IX moving forward, so that it would not be a question anymore. Let's see. It wouldn't. The way that the ERA is phrased right now, it only applies to the public life, and to government whether it's national, state, local policies, regulations, laws. But because it would be in the Constitution, it would allow for Congress to potentially write legislation that would force private actors not to discriminate based on sex. And they would have that say, like, hey, we have enforcement power, which is part of Section 2 of the amendment, that Congress has the power to enforce it. Because our Constitution is very passive. It doesn't automatically give us rights. It says you have this right, but it's up to the people to go and challenge it, to say, my rights were violated by so-and-so, and I'm going to challenge it in court. So there's a lot of, it's really challenging for women, especially if you're thinking about, there's a really important case about pregnancy discrimination at Google. And for one woman to have to go up against Google, you're going to go bankrupt, right? So finding ways and creating laws that make class action lawsuits for women that have experienced sex-based discrimination at work. There's a group of women at Walmart that tried to do that. And basically they said, no, this has to be an individual case-by-case basis, and you have to prove intent, that they intentionally discriminated against you because you were a woman. And getting that kind of evidence is really hard when there's only intermediate scrutiny for women. So if the ERA is added to the Constitution, there's a heightened level of scrutiny on par with race, ethnicity, nationality, that courts will have to determine when they're considering a case. So it's a lot easier for women to win at a heightened level of scrutiny in these cases where they don't have to prove that kind of intent. It's like, here's the evidence. Look at all of these women who are getting paid less. We don't have to prove that it was their unconscious bias. It's just a fact. And they're more likely to win their case at a heightened scrutiny versus the intermediate scrutiny that exists right now. And there have been talks about, using your imagination to consider the kind of laws that, and the level of priority that state legislatures and the national legislature would have if there was an equal rights amendment, like, hey, we need some better healthcare infrastructure for women. We need to have better daycare, affordable daycare in America, and thinking about the kind of things that women are, motherhood, there's a big motherhood penalty for women. It's very expensive to have children, and there's a penalty for women at work, and then they're often paid less and there's pregnancy discrimination that still continues to exist despite, and there's a new Pregnancy Discrimination Act that still hasn't been passed. But just putting a priority on those things and then giving Congress basically the backing to say, this is legal, and if someone tries to challenge it, for courts to say, yes, they do have this constitutional right to write legislation like this. If you've seen, California passed a law that says that on every corporate executive board, there has to be at least one woman. That kind of thing. And in other countries, they have it where it's 50%. 50% of a board has to be women. In political bodies, a certain percent has to be women, proportional to who lives in the state. That could happen in America if we had a better foundation. Of course, it still has to pass. But putting that emphasis on, remember, women, we're half of the population, yet our issues and the things that hold women back in society are not a priority and are not talked about enough. And it's usually just a few women in their political bodies, and they have to try to get everybody else on board. Let's see. We move forward to a couple other examples. Kind of breeze through a bunch of these. As far as it comes to culture, when you think about America and what it means to be American, every constitution written since World War II has a gender equality clause or amendment of some kind. Every constitution the U.S. has been a part of writing, from Japan after World War II and Germany, they have gender equality in their constitution. Afghanistan. Why not the United States of America? There are still so many people pushing back on, we don't need this, we don't need this. Well, you see the kind of sexism and discrimination, and now a rise in misogyny and hate crimes against women. Our culture needs this, and women and men need to grow up reading the Constitution and having it say men and women are equal, no questions about it, to move forward in our society. Because at this point, we can't even sign on to United Nations agreements that, like CEDAW, because we would be in violation of our own constitution. So we're one of the few nations in the world that hasn't signed on to CEDAW, which is basically prohibits countries from discriminating against women. So we can't really be a voice and a leader on the world stage and on these issues when we continue to deny those rights. And that simple, even if it's just symbolic for some people say, well, we don't need it, it's just symbolic. Well, what's wrong with the symbol then? Let's go ahead and add it to the Constitution. So there's going to be a lot of work. It's very vague. So it's going to be up to the people to decide how they want to use the Equal Rights Amendment, to lobby their state legislatures and the national legislatures to write new legislation and to do something with this. So, in thinking about it, it goes into effect 2 years after it's ratified. So people and a lot of advocates have been saying, listen, the clock's ticking right now. It was ratified in January 2020. Time's on the clock. State legislatures, you should be looking at your laws on the books to see if there's inequity that you need to change your laws before women start suing. So if you think about the example of child marriage, New York just became the 6th state to end child marriage in America. That's only the 6th state. So looking at that in general, are there age differences for consent to marry in the United States? Female genitalia mutilation is another one. States have different laws about that. There is a federal law that recently passed, but last time they passed it, it was overturned by district court. So will this one stand without an ERA? It hasn't been challenged yet, but it could be and overturned again. So there's a lot of possibilities, and again, it's just putting that priority back on what is important to our society. The pandemic has really shown how much how much falls to women. The backup for everything is, well, women will take care of it. How many women have left the workforce? How many women have just been struggling to get through all of this? And are we going to allow for it to continue to exist? I think this is a real opportunity for us to band together and say, no more, we need more, and we need to be a priority. So if anyone has any questions about the possibilities with the Equal Rights Amendment, or any questions about the process for ratification or what could happen next, right now we currently advocate for people to contact their U.S. senators and ask them to support the Equal Rights Amendment and pass SJ Res 1 because we're so close. And even if you have a senator who is an ally for the ERA, to say, speak more on this. Go to your partner go down the hallway. We need more bipartisan support and people talking about this, because our time is going to pass. Our opportunity is going to pass if we don't take advantage of it right now. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. I would say, based on our communication with Jerry Moran, since he is going to have to face a primary battle, probably not a lot of vocal support. But you could say you don't have to vote against it, but you can allow for a vote. You cannot filibuster it. Do you want this to be a part of your legacy, that you obstructed equality for women? And we try to talk about their family members, their daughters, their grandchildren. How are you going to act when you voted? When we look at Senator Roy Blunt, we've been really focusing on, because he's retiring. And again, he doesn't have to vote yes. He just has to not filibuster it. And he's like one of those people where I think he's really seriously considering it and allowing it to happen. And especially when you show them the Republican Party platform of the 1970s when people passed it, you say, what has changed between then and now that now you don't think women deserve equality? And a lot of opponents come back to, I didn't talk much about opponents today, they're worried about abortion rights and what this would do, and they take language from Planned Parenthood and other organizations that advocate for women's reproductive health, and say, look, they like the ERA, so therefore you should hate it. There's also, instead of fear-mongering against gay marriage, there's fear-mongering against, because it's the word sex, that what would this mean for the rights of transgender people? We don't want to open the floodgates and everybody's going to be the same. Men and women are going to be in the same prisons together. There's going to be no distinctions between men and women in society. And just because one amendment exists doesn't mean all the rest of them go away. So they're just, it's just fear-mongering at this point, and taking small talking points, and it's just a few obstructionists, because 94% of Americans, based on a Pew Research poll, support the ERA, and over 80% of them think it's already in the Constitution. So people are really shocked that this is not in our U.S. Constitution. And when you talk to students, I was at UMKC last week talking to students and new freshmen, and so many are from visiting from another country to go to study at UMKC, and they too were like, I can't believe this, why are you telling me? So it's disheartening. Any other questions? I would encourage you too to tell your younger family members about the ERA and talk to them about it, because again, there's a gap in knowledge for millennials and Gen Z that just haven't had this kind of education in school, and so I think they would care about it more and talk about it more if they knew about it. And there's just that knowledge gap, and until more K through 12 education changes and improves its curriculum, it's going to continue to be that way. Yes. I know what you're talking about. I'm not going to be able to paraphrase. Yeah. Yes. And in one of her most important decisions as a Supreme Court Justice in 1996 was the case of against the VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, where women were denied entry into the Virginia Military Institute, and they tried to send them to a women's academy. And she's basically, a district court had said no, because there are two separate facilities, it is legal, and the 14th Amendment is upheld. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg and others were able to argue that that's not true. It's not an equal opportunity. It disadvantages women. And so you can still have a women's college as long as you're not disadvantaging women for being there. But if you are preventing somebody from somewhere where they are going to have a better opportunity, or they would, necessarily be discriminated against later on, then you have to allow them opportunity. And so it elevated the level of scrutiny a little bit more because of that case when it comes to, that form of discrimination. But when you think about how sexual assault is handled in the military right now, and some of the changes that need to be made, and harassment, those are all government employees. So the ERA could apply pretty quickly to all those government employees that are experiencing a lot of violence in the military. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, I think it goes back to the cultural norms, and when justice is not pursued in the same level of, I guess, priority to other violent crimes. So there's another important case, and that happened in Castle Rock, Colorado. A woman had a restraining order against her estranged husband, and he picked up her kids from school one day. And she immediately called the police and said, he's violating his restraining order, he's not supposed to be near us. And the Castle Rock police said, he's with his dad, it's fine. Later the kids called him from an amusement park nearby, so she knew where they were, and she called the police back and they said, they're with their dad at an amusement park, it's going to be okay. And they didn't enforce the restraining order or try to go get her kids. Well, by the end of the day, he had killed both of her children and himself. And so she sued the police department. And ultimately, the Supreme Court determined that the restraining order was non-binding. The police don't have to enforce restraining orders. It's up to their discretion. When so many restraining orders are in place to protect women around the country, what is the point then? How are you protecting people? If you think about how many untested rape kits there are in backlog in so many states, are you really pursuing full justice for women on these cases? How many, and so then therefore women don't come forward with their case, and the violence persists because culturally people get away with it. There's no consequences. So there are just so many layers of it, and we just deal with it. We just silently deal with it, and it persists and persists, and we just have to be more vocal about this is unacceptable. Yes? Since I'm a high school educator, I talk about this all the time about where is the level of we're starting with kids at a really young age, like men and girls. What is consent? What is acceptable? They get on group chats and other things, and it runs rampant. And nobody, it's almost sometimes encouraged by their parents. It's like generational and entrenched. And so you're right, until they see role models on TV. I mean, every night you turn on TV, there's going to be a show about violence against women. That's like entertainment. Violence against women. What would the world look like, or what would the United States look like if there was no shows with violence against women for a whole year? It just becomes acceptable. It just becomes a part of our norm. Oh, it happens. Oh, we'll change our behavior. We'll be scared while we walk everywhere. Why? Why do we have to live that way? Any final questions? Thank you so much. This was such a great opportunity. I really appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you to Erica. I think I know this was a very serious topic, and some parts of it were probably hard to hear about, but I do think it helps us to remain vigilant and fighting for things, and I think it especially helps us honor everyone who's doing all the hard work that they're doing. So with that, I would like to honor, and is Chris Ball, is she here? There you are, right in front of me. Chris, what I would like to happen now is I would like for all the administrative assistants that are here to stand up so that we can recognize you for your hard work. I know that lots of times decisions are made at upper levels, and you guys are the ones that are doing the work. And a lot of hard, tedious work with a lot of attention to detail and a lot of patience. And I know that in our office, we have not always had admin all the time, and so many of you have reached out and said, what can I do to help you? And so that is very much appreciated. So we do have flowers for every one of you, and that's why, Chris, I was hoping you would come up and hand some long stem. We have a sunflower for everyone for Women's Equality from Kansas. So in each one of the administrative professionals, males included, because I know we have some males on our campus who are administrative assistants, would please come forward and get flowers. And not, it's like they're not jumping up. We realize that a lunch out in the garden and some flowers are not a whole lot, but they are a token of our esteem and thankfulness and recognition of your hard work. And then if there are others who would like to take any flowers, we have many. There are like 40 administrative assistants on our campus, and I think there's probably only 10 of you here. So if you would like to take some back to some other administrative assistants in your area, please feel free to do so. And now I would like to have Pam Walden. I can bring the microphone to you, I think. Yeah, okay. I will bring it to you and have you, so you don't have to stand.
I'm very used to the sun. I'm not used to the holes in the grass, though. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the garden because there are a lot of misconceptions about it. It is actually funded by a woman who is 104 years old. She's funded it from the very, very beginning. It started out at the museum, and when the woman who headed it before me passed away, her name was Carolyn Walden, She passed away in 2008, and it was a tremendous loss, but she started the garden in 1998, so she had it for 10 years. Carolyn Walden. Do any of you know her? She was very, very active in Kansas City, Kansas, in charity work, organizational work. And she was the president of the, what's it called? The Historical Society. And so that's why it ended up in the park. So when she passed away, the Historical Society was ready for it to leave there. They wanted to use the land for something else. And so Esther Foreman said, please try the community college. She had graduated from the community college in 1937 and had always had her heart here. And I said, well, I'm not sure that that's something that they would want to do. So I kind of pushed her aside. And I had known Esther for many years. She traveled with my husband Henry and me for many, many years. And, we did the spring break trips. And so she kept after me. Many, many times she said, please go to KCKCC. So finally, I thought, well, I'll go and be embarrassed. So I went to Jeff Sixta and I asked him, and he said, Pam, I think that's a wonderful idea. So he went to the administration. He told me to go to the administration, but before I had a chance, he'd already gone to them. And then he said they like it, and he said write a letter to the board. So before I'd written a letter to the board had already accepted the idea, and so it was put into action, and it's here. And so we came here in 2008, and it's really been an uphill battle. We've had a lot of setbacks, but it's thriving now and flourishing, and the purpose of the garden is to educate the children of Wyandotte County, and we always have sirens. When we work here, the sirens are going several times a day. And I always wonder where they're going and what they're doing. I don't know. So, the purpose is to educate children of Wyandotte County. Esther was an educator. She taught 25 years in Kansas City, Kansas, and she taught kindergarten, and she's a lifelong learner. Belonged to the Teachers Association, I think, longer than she did her teaching. Of course, she outlived 2 husbands and said she wouldn't marry a third one because they always die. But she keeps living. And she lives up the road at the health resort of Kansas, and now it's closed down and she can't leave, and it's the COVID thing that comes and goes, and so she can't leave. Not that she can leave anyway. She's in a wheelchair, and at 104 you don't do much but sit in your wheelchair. But I go see her every Tuesday, and we talk about the garden. But her plans are always to find other ways to educate children and adults to the history of Wyandotte County. So it's truly an ethnobotanical garden. It starts with the lives of the Kansas Indians, and I chose the Kansas Indians rather than the Wyandotte because the Kansas Indians were here longer in the past. And it's a small garden. We don't have enough room for multiple tribes of Indians, so I chose the Kansas Indians. Then there are periods, and I brought some brochures for you so that you can see what the different passing those around, Carol. Thank you. There's another hole. There are 9 gardens at this point, and each one represents a different period. And it goes through 1924. So it goes from prehistoric through 1924. And each period, it describes in the brochure what they are, so I don't have to take my time and your time in the heat to explain. I've contrived a scavenger hunt to take you through the garden rather than give you a lengthy tour. I have a lot of tours, and those are also explained in the brochure. So here you go. Each take one. And then if you need a pen, I have pens, so you can see me for a pen. And the scavenger hunt works this way. You start at this end of the garden and go to the other end. At the other end is a table where you can pick up your prizes. I'll look at your sheets and see how many right answers you have. Whoever gets all the right answers, well, the first one who gets all the right answers gets a $50 bill, and whoever gets second one to get all the right answers gets a $50 bill. And if anybody else gets all the right answers, I have 15 jars of things that I've canned that are from foods in the garden. So I have some apple, it's a Pioneer apple butter that came from the tree that's out there, and I'm not going to name it because that's part of your scavenger hunt. And a couple of other things. So I have 15 other prizes besides the two $50 bills. So I hope that you all get prizes. Woo.
Okay. I should have said, because we have so many new people on our campus, if you don't know who Pam Walden is, used to be Pam Lewis. She used to teach here at KCKCC, the honors program, and I know you did more than honors. Was it history, English? English. Yes, that's what I thought. You're right about the sirens. I'm sorry, what did you say? ESL, that's right. You started the ESL program. That was before I was even here. So, yes. And her first husband, Henry Lewis, the Lewis Social Science Building is named for her first husband. He was the dean of the Social Science Center. People who've been here a long time remember that, but others of you who are new, wanted to let you know that. So, if you're not too terribly hot and you would like to go through the garden, please do so. And that concludes our program. Other than if you want to go get some prizes, or if there's anything else that anybody else wants to say or add to our program. Thank you. I do want to say one thing to Erica Benson. Erica, flowers are for you. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. We're so glad you came and put up with the heat and the insects flying around.